Okay, I'm going to quick do an overview of the Industrial Revolution. We already talked about the Agricultural Revolution and how the increase of food provided better nutrition, which helped fight off diseases, but also increased the population. With this increase of population and more growth of food, there's less need for farmers, so we're going to have a change in how things are done from the cottage system to the Industrial Revolution. But before we go and talk about how goods were made during the Industrial Revolution, we're going to be looking at where it started. Well, it's the 1700s, and it starts in Britain. Okay, Britain at the time made up Scotland, Wales, and England, which is all of this right in this region, and that equaled Britain. There are four things that really helped create the Industrial Revolution and why it started in Britain. The first reason is resources, and there's a lot of resources that helped bring in the Industrial Revolution in Britain. One of them was coal. Coal was used for the steam engines to run machines away from water. Another thing was the wool. Wool was used for fabrics for the textile industry. A lot of the factories ended up making clothing. Another thing was the metal. Metal was used for the machines, the locomotives, and to produce the factories. And the other thing with resources would be definitely all the rivers that you see along here. That would also help with the industry. But basically, those are some of the resources that were available to the people. Another thing that helped, besides resources, another thing that helped the Industrial Revolution in Britain was a large population. And I want you to know that the large population was centered in cities. Okay, here's the city Leeds. You have Manchester. You have Liverpool. If you're into English soccer, you probably recognize some of these cities. Birmingham, Newcastle. So there you go. Here's Exeter. Yeah, Berks County basically names all our areas off of British or English areas, like Exeter, for instance. Cymru, I believe, is in Wales. That said, we have a large population that's centered in cities because of the enclosure movement. Farmers are being kicked off the land. They have nowhere to go. City life is growing. And these factories that are going to be built are built in cities, so you need a large population of workers to take those jobs. The third thing is stable government. We talked about the French Revolution, and we talked about the nationalistic revolutions and the liberal revolutions. In England, it was a pretty stable government, so there weren't any revolutions like what we saw with France and what we saw with England, especially, or what we saw in Europe, especially in times like 1848 when they all sprung up. None of that's going on. It's a stable government, so people can concentrate on making money instead of wanting freedom and democracy. So we have resources, large population, stable government, and the fourth thing is technology. A lot of people are coming up with technology. They're stealing them from other countries and bringing them back to Britain, but technology is a new thing that's causing these are the four things that will end up causing the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Now, when we talked about coal, I just want to quickly bring up a new idea of making goods and work. You know, we talked about the cottage industry, how everyone was at home, mom and dad and children were at home. Here is the coal industry. Kids are even going off to work. Little Johnny right there. Little Johnny's smiling. Okay, I mean, that's crazy that little Johnny can smile because he's working, 12, 14 hours a day, getting beat if he doesn't do his job, and he doesn't get a very good life as a coal miner. Many of the coal miners are young because they simply didn't live very long lives. You want to see a 40-year-old coal miner, they would have died by that time. And see, yeah, now he's upset, so rightly so. So just keep in mind, this is all this idea is getting resources. The cottage system is dying, and people are actually leaving their houses to find work because you have these large populations that they just simply don't need farmers anymore, and there's new industry to make money. And here we come to this new industry. The domestication system is done where you make goods at home. Now you have the factory system. Here's your factory. Here's the steam being produced to run the machines. And basically the factory system brought up 4 different elements of what life was like working in the factory. You basically had a schedule that was very rigid. You can relate to that with public school with the bell system. You had to be work on time. If you weren't on time, you were either beaten, pay deduction, or fired. There are lines of people. Here are my people. Lines of people. Now this is water, so they want to be staying on water, but you get the idea. Lines of people waiting to want to get work. And if someone got fired, Johnny got hurt in that window, got in an accident, Johnny's gone, new guy comes in. So they can treat the workers pretty harshly because there's such a demand for work as the onset of the Industrial Revolution. Another one is the 12 to 14 hour work days. More 12 hours during the winter time, 14 hours during the summertime. We talked about how if there's a little baby, here's a baby, baby's crying, screaming, parents would give the kid opium. At the beginning stages of the Industrial Revolution, there's cases of parents giving kids opium to keep them quiet because these parents are working 12, 14 hours a day. They need to get some sleep. As I said, the opium was no longer allowed in Britain, so they ended up just selling them to the Chinese. We'll talk about that later on. So you have the rigid schedule. You have the 12 to 14 hours a day. You have the dangerous conditions. You got a guy working, and he gets in an accident, and his arm falls off. He's fired, and because he can't work with one arm, and that's it. Dangerous conditions. The owners didn't take time to make sure the conditions were good. Again, this is on the onset, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. As time goes on, things will get a little bit better for the workers. And then we have the boring job. It's almost as boring as this podcast. They just had to. You saw the Charlie Chaplin Modern Times video clip at the beginning where he's just tightening bolts. That's basically what they did. Tightening bolts, tightening bolts, tightening bolts. Alright, so here we got one other thing about the Industrial Revolution that I want to talk about. These new inventions, the technology that we were talking about. The flying shuttle is one of them. That helped produce fabrics to make textiles, to make clothing. That was a central technology that helped spur on. So no longer is the cottage industry making the clothing. Clothing isn't made at home. People go to work to make the clothing. Clothing becomes more abundant. They can make clothing at a faster rate, so it becomes cheaper for many people to enjoy at the expense of the factory workers. I mean, their conditions are bad, but a lot of people are going to benefit from this. You can relate to this with the third world countries that make your shirts, but your shirts are a lot cheaper, and that's why you buy shirts made in Bangladesh, because they're cheap. We'll talk about that too later on. Then you got the steam engine, Mr. Watt. That's a big invention. Here you have burning of coal producing the machines to run, and that's going to create pollution, but that's another invention. The steam ship is another one that really helps transport goods outside of England. You know, Britain is an island nation, so the steam ship's going to really help connect the world and make the world a lot more global. And then you got the locomotive is another one. You got the train right here. Didn't go very fast at first, but these locomotives will eventually really change society. It'll bring cities closely together. Poor people for the first time can travel in large numbers. Goods will be a lot cheaper because they can ship goods to different places a lot faster. News will be spread a lot faster. Dialects and accents will be gone because the world will be a lot closer. These technologies are really going to change the society and the way the Industrial Revolution works. There you go. See, it wasn't that bad.